Step inside the Great Pyramid of Giza, and you find yourself face to face with one of the strangest facts of ancient history. The walls of the pyramid have nothing to say. No spells or prayers, not even the name of the king. The Giza pyramids are infamously devoid of inscriptions, but what if the pyramids were not meant to be silent? What if the texts they contained are simply lost? Based on recent investigations, that's exactly what I believe happened. And by the end of this episode, you just might too. The silence of the 4th dynasty pyramids of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure has fueled countless theories about Giza, about what these monuments really are, and what was supposed to happen inside of them. What makes the silence truly strange is this. Other Egyptian pyramids have walls filled with writing. The inner chambers of later pyramids, starting with a 5th dynasty king named Unas, are covered, floor to ceiling, in hieroglyphs. These spells are the oldest surviving religious writings in history. They aimed to transform the king into a god and enable his ascent to the sky. Today, we call them the pyramid texts. But they've left us with a real puzzle. Why are the grandest pyramids ever built completely bare, while the more modest, later pyramids are replete with writings? The standard theory is that the texts just had not been written until after the Giza pyramids, and must have been composed around the time that they were first inscribed during the 5th dynasty. But several top Old Kingdom scholars have come to a different conclusion. Recent studies suggest the story of the pyramid texts begins much earlier. The texts contain many signs of being copies of older documents. This includes evidence of corrections, which shows that the texts were not originally written for the king Unas and must have been composed at an earlier point. The pyramid texts also combine mythological traditions that seem to have developed separately. A key example concerns Horus, who in later traditions is almost always the son of Osiris. But in the pyramid texts, he sometimes has a different genealogy, appearing instead as the son of the earth god, Geb. Archaic language in many of the writings adds even further weight to the idea that the pyramid texts had developed over a long period of time. In other words, far from being a new invention, the pyramid texts look a lot more like a compilation of a much older set of traditions. But how old exactly? Recently, 2 scholars have suggested that core elements of the pyramid text spells could have emerged centuries earlier than usually thought. These assessments suggest that the origins of the pyramid texts could go all the way back to the 2nd dynasty, or even further. That makes it entirely plausible that some version of the afterlife spells existed at the time of the pyramids of Giza. Which brings us back to the bare walls of the Giza pyramids. If the pyramid text spells, or something like them, already existed in the age of Khufu, why aren't they carved inside the Great Pyramid? The pyramid texts themselves seem to offer an answer. Spell after spell opens with the same phrase, words to be spoken. Clearly, an oral tradition was at the root of the pyramid texts. The spells, originally, could have been intended to be spoken inside the burial chambers at Giza. At the same time, scholars believe it's likely that the Egyptians began writing down these spells on papyrus or leather pretty early on. Evidence of early religious writings as far back as the 2nd dynasty makes this a real possibility. And that's the key to this theory. Because according to one Egyptologist, pyramid text spells could have been present in written form within the Giza pyramids, just not inscribed on the walls. This theory suggests that the 4th dynasty kings were already taking these texts into the tomb with them, written on their wooden coffins or linen wrappings, or on rolls placed in the burial. The inscription of funerary texts on coffins is a well-known phenomena from ancient Egypt. It's just that this is usually seen as a later development. But what if texts on coffins actually came first, prior to the texts in pyramids? That would explain why the Giza pyramid builders, such as Khufu, did not feel compelled to inscribe their chambers. They had everything they needed within the burial itself. Of course, if the Giza burials once contained sacred writings, an obvious question follows: where are they? Because no Old Kingdom royal burial has ever been found intact, any evidence is long gone. The objects containing funerary spells are the ones that were most likely to have been taken by tomb robbers. The granite sarcophagi of the Old Kingdom pyramids are all that's left, and they are empty. That raises another big question. If kings had been taking these texts into the burials for centuries, why did King Unas and his successors start carving them into stone? While it's impossible to know for sure, one can envision multiple motives at work. Given the likelihood of tomb robbery, the pyramid texts may have been created as a backup system to the texts that were written on portable objects in the burial. The inscriptions would have given permanence to the spells through embedding them right into the walls. A thief could carry off a papyrus roll or tear apart a coffin, but the walls were staying put. The carving of the pyramid texts might have had another motive for Unas as well. The expanded textual surface would have been seen to endow the king with greater magical power for his afterlife journey. We can see this impulse clearly in the successors of Unas in the 6th dynasty, when the pharaohs kept expanding the corpus. The chambers of King Pepi I contained more than 3 times as many lines of text as the pyramid of Unas. Each king wanted more spells than the last. And if this theory is right, Unas himself was doing the very same thing, expanding on the more modest set of texts that the 4th dynasty kings had taken into their burials. It would also mean that the emptiness of the pyramid chambers is not what it seems. Based on evidence that is little discussed outside of Egyptology, it's clear that earlier prototypes of the pyramid texts could very well have existed by the time of the Giza pyramids. One of the biggest clues comes from the pyramid that started it all, the step pyramid of the 3rd dynasty king, Djoser. Built upward in a series of ascending levels of stone in the desert necropolis of Saqqara, the step pyramid was the product of Djoser's famous architect, Imhotep. As the excavator of the pyramid once put it, the monument was clearly envisioned by Imhotep as a, quote, gigantic flight of steps rising to the sky, as if to facilitate the ascent of the dead king's soul. In the Pyramid of Unas, which he built just a few minutes' walk from the Djoser complex, one of the inscribed spells discusses the afterlife journey of the king in a strikingly similar way. Quote, a stairway to the sky is set up for me, that I may ascend on it. In other words, the architecture of the earliest pyramid, built well before the Giza pyramids, and the theology of the later pyramid texts are cut from the same cloth. But that isn't the only connection between the 3rd dynasty and the pyramid texts. A 3rd dynasty shrine built by Djoser features members of the divine family of the pyramid texts, known as the Ennead. It was discovered at the site of ancient Heliopolis in modern Cairo, which is where most Egyptologists believe the original pyramid text theology was developed. According to one scholar, it's not far-fetched to think that Imhotep himself, who held a title later linked to Heliopolis and who was remembered as a great writer, may have had a hand in the development of this theology. And yet nearly everything from ancient Heliopolis, save for one lone obelisk, was dismantled and carted off as building materials. My point is, this is yet another reason why we shouldn't expect much of a paper trail for the composition of the pyramid texts. But in terms of the evidence that has survived, it points in a remarkably consistent direction, and that direction is up. Across the royal pyramids, we find design elements that seem to resonate with the cosmic themes of the pyramid texts. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, for instance, has descending and ascending passages, a celestial orientation, and shafts aimed toward the sky. The architecture does seem to be speaking the common language of cosmic alignment and upward movement, shared by both the earlier pyramids, such as Djoser's, and later pyramids, such as that of Unas. Even the sarcophagus itself has been interpreted in light of the pyramid texts, as a symbol of the sky goddess Nut, from whom the deceased king was reborn. In other words, the walls of the Great Pyramid may be bare, but the building itself seems to be tuned to the same frequency as the later texts carved in stone. When it comes to the corpus of spells we know today as the pyramid texts, it's clear that some version of them, now lost, could have served Khufu just as they would later serve Unas. Unas, from our vantage point, is simply the moment the tradition becomes visible. For centuries before that, the words may have been spoken in darkness, recited from papyri, painted on coffins. Eventually, the Egyptians took this ritual technology and carved it into the pyramid itself. And because they did, we're finally able to hear the voice that was probably present in some form all along. The voice of the pyramid. A voice saying, "The king is not dead. The king lives." The king becomes an eternal being of light and ascends to the gods. The pyramid texts are not just the earliest religious writings in history. They are a portal into a long-forgotten world of sacred traditions about death and the afterlife. These texts may also be the explanation we've been seeking for one of the biggest mysteries of Giza, the mystery of why, inside the greatest pyramid of all, the walls never needed to say a word. Thanks for watching Aegyptica Episode 4 to the end. For full bibliography and footnotes, check out Aegyptica.com. Next up, I'm planning episodes on the origins of Osiris and Seth, so please subscribe if you'd like to see those. And please join me next time for another journey into the art, literature, and philosophy of ancient Egypt.